So, hey, welcome back to Graybeard Astrology channel. I'm Jim. So, I thought we'd do something a little bit different here. Working on other videos and stuff with what I'm starting to call the pillars of astrology series. Going to be doing primary and secondary direction next. I'm working on that one. I got kind of bogged down with it, so I decided to change gears and do this little profile video and see how that goes. I recorded it once and I didn't like it, so I'm recording it again. But got other plans for the channel going forward. I'm going to cover sect soon, whole sign houses soon, and the primary directions. They all kind of, the problem I'm having is that to talk about one, you have to talk about the others. So it's, I'm kind of having a problem trying to fit so many things into one video and stuff. So what I'm thinking, that's the problem I had with doing this one. So I'm trying to shorten them up and not put so much stuff in there because I just go off on tangents, Anyway, so let's look at Jim's chart here and talk about Jim Morrison a bit. Okay, yeah, so most people are familiar with Jim Morrison. He was a very popular singer with the rock group The Doors in the late 60s. Sadly passed away in mid-71. He was the last of the three that were known as the 27 Club. Many more people joined the 27 Club, but Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and then Jim Morrison passed away, all within I think it was 6 months of each other, if not a year. But Jim was a very influential artist in his time. Quite legendary. So this is his chart. We'll talk about the specifics a little bit later maybe, but just to highlight some things, looking at any chart, when I start looking at any chart, the first thing I go to is to find out where the sun is in the chart. So the sun in Jim's chart is in the 11th house here. So it's above the horizon. The ascendant-descendant line across the middle of the chart represents and illustrates the horizon. So above that line is considered daytime, when the sun is out in the daytime, and then below that horizontal line is considered the nighttime. So by having his sun in the 11th house, we now know that it's a day chart or a diurnal chart. So that's one key thing we look for first. And then we look at the ascendant sign, where the green arrow is. And we notice that is the sign of Aquarius. So we will right away focus in on where Saturn is, which is the other green arrow on the right side. And Saturn's located in the 5th house in this chart. The other interesting thing is pointing back to the sun in the 11th house. Because it's in the sign of Sagittarius, we are then going to right away look for the ruling planet of that sign. And it is Jupiter on the right side of the chart in the 7th house with the other red arrow there. Now Jupiter also is squaring the MC, which is at the top of the chart in the 10th house, the second red arrow there. So that Jupiter is making a square to the MC. Now, all of those things I just kind of mentioned, the sun being in the 11th in Sagittarius, the ascendant in Aquarius, the green arrow there where Saturn is, and the other red arrow where Jupiter is. Those are the first things we're going to look at in the chart, or any chart, when we first bring it up. So Saturn is the chart ruler. It is a diurnal chart, which makes Jupiter the benefic of the sect of the chart, and that's the sun being above the horizon is the indication of what sect it is. If the sun was below the ascendant axis, it would be a nighttime chart or a nocturnal chart. So those are just kind of some of the basics right off the bat of what we're looking at in the chart here. Other things we could point out, we have Venus up there at the 10th house in Scorpio. Mercury is in the 12th house in Capricorn. And then Mars is down in the 5th house also with Saturn and Uranus in the sign of Gemini. And the moon's down there in the 4th house in Taurus. So Jim's chart shows an enormous public success through visionary charisma and partnership with the strong sun in the sign of Sagittarius in the 11th house. 11th house is dealing with groups and kind of more futuristic outlooks and plans for life, but it's more networking, groups, and public image. It indicates identity tied to large audiences and aspirations that brought about one of the aspects that brought about his tremendous fame. The ruler, Jupiter, of course, like I mentioned, is, because it's in the 7th house, angular. It adds, it's at 100% power, adds expansive alliances, and it helps him out with public appeal, but I think it has more to do with his relationships, creating, just having, it's a benefacting planet in relationships, meeting the right people, whether that be his bandmates or a record contract or just individuals personally and stuff. It's just a benefic planet in the house of relationships. Most people, it would be a sign of a pleasant marriage and stuff. And Jim did have a long relationship with one particular person. It would show a dominating relationships with his fans and collaborations to create, a big. Jupiter represents a big cultural impact. Now, Venus in Scorpio is in the 10th house, which is an indication of art or creativity or music in the career house. Not all the time, but it is a good marker for it. Venus in Scorpio is in its detriment, but it's one of the sexier signs for Venus to be in, but it's the antithesis of. So instead of like romantic dinners, it's more like black leather pants and Jack Daniels. Yeah. So now I want to move over just to this slide here. See, now this slide is nice because it kind of highlights the part of the chart I'm talking about with his ascendant here. I think this would be, the visionary alien orientation. Aquarius ascendant, fundamentally designed to be the visionary, the alien, the ultimate rule breaker, viewing society from a detached, progressive and highly rebellious vantage point. Well, instead of alien, Jim came up, I don't know, who knows, I don't know who came up with the Lizard King, but we'll substitute lizard for the alienness of that slide here. But In Jim's chart, the Aquarius ascendant, which is traditionally interpreted through the lens of its ruler, Saturn, which is placed in Jim's chart in the 5th house. And we'll talk more about that. But Saturn is the greater malefic. It's a cold and dry planet. It's about structure and restriction and decay. So some of the catchwords would be, stable, discipline, authoritative, undignified, inhibited, and limiting. Those are words to describe of the sign of Aquarius. And those are so Jim is not a rebelliousness, doesn't have the rebelliousness of what people want to say Aquarius modern astrology. They would equate it to the planet Uranus, which is chaos and revolutionary. But more traditionally, it's about restriction and unconformity, because Saturn is ruling Aquarius and it's opposite the sign of Leo, and Leo is the sun, it's the king, it's all the rule maker. So Aquarius is the rule breaker because he's ruled by Saturn. So this gives the rebellious, unconventional quality to Aquarius, rising not through sudden shocks or innovation, such as the modern understanding of Uranus being its ruler, but through Saturn's inherent resistance to conformity, a deliberate, almost defiant refusal to follow the crowd, driven by a need for personal discipline and authenticity over social approval. Jim Morrison's public persona was an enigma of a poetic rebel who rejected the norms and authority that reflects Saturn's cold, independent nature rather than an explosive, chaotic, changing Uranian kind of view of Aquarius rising. So Jim stood apart because Saturn's demands he build his own rules and then break them. Even if it led to a self-imposed limitation or alienation. The chart's predictive karma shows this fixed pattern, a life of structured rebellion, where unconventional identity emerges through discipline and endurance. That first house is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn's in the 5th. Packaged rebellion with dark magnetism, Scorpio midheaven, and Venus in the 10th house. The detached Aquarian rebel has transcended taboo breaking, highly dangerous, magnetic. This was the archetype of the dark rock god made manifest in the public eye. Yeah, I didn't write that. But it is like I said earlier, Venus is a indication of creativity or artistic, or in the sign of Scorpio, it's ruled by Mars. We'll get into that more, where Mars in his 5th house. So, a planet in the 5th is ruling the 10th. But yeah, I don't think that Venus had much, it obviously doesn't have any dignity in the sign of Scorpio. It's placed in the 10th house, which is good for it. It's ruling the 4th house, though. It's ruling the moon. The hidden craving for earthly groundedness is moon. This is opposite that Venus. But now Venus, in detriment, is ruling this very strongly dignified moon. And the dignified moon is taking and ruling the 6th house. So, a hidden, deep, sensual, and stubborn emotional core that ultimately craved the very peace, stability, and grounding his wild life actively destroyed. So, Traditional astrology, where the moon kind of represents the body, the instinctual mind and stuff, and just generically talking, anybody with I think the moon in the fourth house, you're very guarded about anything. You're not going to show your emotions well, kept in check, well hidden in a private. It's the least public space in the chart. So a person's, kind of sense of security and stuff like that would be kind of strong. Now, his moon in Taurus is like the best sign or domicile that it could be in. It's not its rulership, which is Cancer, but some people say that the moon in Taurus is stronger in exaltation than in rulership. So fortification-wise, I mean, this is a significant. This is a signal or a sign of somebody with some toughness behind them, some definite grit. He's very emotionally kind of stable, believe it or not. With all that Saturn ascendant, and now we have this very stable moon here, or at least maybe his childhood was hard to say. Because there's every planet in his chart is afflicted somewhere. So, but independently, the moon in Taurus is a really strong placement for it. So he needed some grounding. He needed some grounding. He needed some stability and stuff. But the ruler is over there in his career house, being a rock star. So there was a polarity there, pulling him in two different directions of celebrity and needing to retreat. So then we get to his fifth house here, where the Saturn and the Mars and Uranus are the restless energy of the artistry, the fifth house Gemini cluster. The center of this hyperactivity, restlessness, and high communication artistry. It represents the chaotic, swirling energy of creation, where his wordsmithing lyrics and performances were born. So we have the sign of Gemini, the communicator, in his fifth house of creativity, and it's ruled by Mercury over there in the 12th house, which kind of, I think, lends to the problem of some of his life of excess. The fifth house is kind of an area we look at for excess. So the ruler cannot see the house. So the manager is kind of absentee manager of the affairs of that house. And Mars and Saturn are the two most destructive planets. And Uranus, from a modern point of view, is pretty destructive too. So it's just a world of chaos going in this fifth house. But it's also, look at his music career and stuff. And he was this enormous poet, very dynamic, creative person. I think with anything he would have touched, he would have been an artist of some kind, But he was a wordsmith, He was a relentless reader. So, and there's many other aspects that bounce off of this too, because the Mars is kind of opposite the Sun, and is making other. And the Mars and Saturn are in they're in mutual reception by rulership, but they can't see each other. They don't make a natural aspect to each other. So I kind of I coined my own phrase here, blind mutual reception, which means they can't see each other. So there's all kinds of theories on how dignified that mutual reception is. But I think generically, it's called adversion, where the ruler cannot see the sign, And I think that just plays into a lack of responsibility, And Mercury's in the 12th, too, the house of undoing, another house of excess. So it's just kind of magnifying the burden and brilliance of volatile genius. Once again, we have the Mars, Saturn, and Uranus in Gemini. The aggressive, driving intellect of Mars, the erratic, lightning strike flashes of brilliance from Uranus, and the heavy, demanding burden of structuring and manifesting his art through Saturn. So it's kind of more of a poetic way of talking about, and that's just looking at these three planets just sitting in this house, not the aspects or blending everything together. A karmic blueprint for explosive fame. Jupiter and Pluto North Node in Leo. The karmic blueprint for massive, explosive, and transformational fame achieved through others, specifically through partnerships, bandmates, and direct formation with the public. So it wasn't Jim Morrison, it was Jim Morrison and the Doors, That's another way of looking at his rising sign of Aquarius. He didn't have Leo rising. He was part of the group. And also, so this Pluto and this Jupiter in the 7th house is an indication of meeting Ray Manzarek and the other Doors members. That, was his ticket, by forming the band for the massive explosion in his career, that Jupiter is squaring that MC, which is your public life indicator. And now Pluto is just power. And the North Node is appetite. It's a metaphor for it. The North Node is a desire for that area of the chart. So it's like a insatiable thirst. And then you have Pluto there, so it's an insatiable thirst for power or destruction. And also going back to that first house, we had his the South Node in that first house. And there's an indication of excess. It's an indication of possible substance abuse, having the South Node really close to the ascendant. It's also an indication of being really into spirituality of some kind. And I think Jim's kind of personality reflects both of those things, probably more leaning towards the excess and stuff. But he was kind of a shaman, a rock and roll shaman, I think other people have called him that. Activating the destined partnership. So Jim formed the Doors shortly after kind of sort of finishing film school at UCLA with a fellow student, Ray Manzarek, in the summer of 1965 when he was 21 years old, forming this specific creative partnership was the exact catalyst needed to ignite his Leo North Node conjunct Pluto, launching him directly into the stratosphere of the music scene and stuff. Pluto and North Node and Jupiter all in that 7th house. So it was he needed the Doors. Stepping into the midheaven persona, the 10th house perfection year. The zenith of his fame and influence, stepping fully into the dark, magnetic Scorpio midheaven and the planet Venus, public persona established at birth. So I believe that he was 21 when they put the Doors together, and he was 27 when they passed away. So it was a 6-year span. So there's a technique in astrology, traditional astrology, it's called the perfection year. So I don't want to explain too much of it because it takes too much time, but needless to say, the 21st year was a 10th house perfection year. And his last year of life was a fourth house perfection year. So his whole Doors career was those 6 years of the transition from 10th house perfection year to fourth house perfection year. And in another video or something like that, where we go through perfections and how they work, it can be explained. But if you're familiar with them, it's so fascinating. The inevitable pull of the underworld, the fourth house perfection year, which was his 27th year. And this goes for the whole idea of the 27 club. Let's see, Kurt Cobain, Janis and Jimi Hendrix and stuff like I mentioned earlier. So breaking the 6-year sprint from the 10th house perfection year, like I had mentioned when he was 21 and they formed the band, to a fourth house perfection year, which was 27 years old, the year he passed away. He graduated and the band formed in 65, spanning precisely this vital, fatal astrological perfection arc, terminating with his death in 1971. I did, this is his natal chart on the left, and I did a solar return chart for the year he passed away. And there's a few things I thought was interesting. So we have Mercury on the left chart here in the yellow arrow. Mercury's in the 12th house. And on the right chart, Mercury has returned to its natal location. And whenever you get planets in their natal position in a solar return chart, they're destined to express themselves in their natural, what's called the natal promise and stuff. And I bring that up because in the solar return chart, the sign of Virgo is rising, giving power to that Mercury in the 5th house here in the solar return chart. So that's one thing. We have in the left chart here, in the natal chart on the left, we have his natal moon here in blue highlighted, 9 degrees Taurus. And if you go over to the chart on the right in the solar return, you'll see the part of fortune in the solar return chart is at 12. Now it's not, that's 3 degrees away from the moon, but right next to it you see Saturn. Saturn is transiting the perfection year house, because this, back to the natal chart on the left here, the blue arrow, that is the house that's being perfected the year he passes away. This is the 27th club. Everybody at 27 years old goes through a fourth house perfection year. The reason it's a subject in astrology is because the fourth house is also one of the many things is it's about the earth. What goes in the earth? When you pass away, they bury people in the earth, so it's connected with the ending of life. It's the ends of everything in some traditional phrases that are connected with that. It's the subterranean house. It deals with ancestors and land, so it deals with what's in the ground, and that's where we end back up. So it's something that astrology community looks at when they're talking about this 27th club. So that Saturn transiting that fourth house is a real big indicator of not so good, and not so good because the moon is located here, and the moon represents the body. So don't misunderstand me, say, just because Saturn's in the fourth house during this perfection year, he's going to die. No, that's not what I'm trying to highlight. What I'm trying to highlight is that the moon that represents the body is being highlighted in the perfection year, and Saturn is transiting it. So, and Saturn is making a sign-based opposition to the ruler Venus too, to magnify that. And Saturn has just made a transit to a square to the ascendant also. And those are all indications of the physical body. So, and Saturn, not the fun guy. And you can see that Jim hasn't even came near his Saturn return, because Saturn, he does not live long enough to have Saturn go into Gemini, which would be the beginning of what's called the Saturn return at the age of 28 and a half-ish. So he never even lived through a whole Saturn cycle. If you can imagine how Saturn would have been when it hit his natal Uranus, that would have been crazy, explosions of, and he was facing jail time. He was facing all kinds of lawsuits. So, and he was, this is if you look at the solar return chart on the right here, Saturn is in the 9th house. Some could say lawsuits. Some could say lawsuits with that. So, it's just interesting. Now in the solar return chart on the right, the moon, because we're talking about the moon on the left chart, indicated in the 4th house perfection here, the moon in the solar return chart is in the 8th house, the house of death. So, fascinating things to look at. Venus in the solar return chart is at 10 degrees Scorpio, so that's made a natal return to its location. Jim Morrison's life was not a random sequence of chaotic events, but the perfect volatile execution of a sacred astrological blueprint. So, wow. Some other tidbits that we could talk about, though. If we go back to this, his natal chart and stuff. So the Saturn and the Mars in the 5th house. Mars is a dominating and dynamic, but it's destructive and chaotic. It's destructive creativity, and its ruler, like I said, Mercury is very weak and in the 12th house. The pleasure is realized through difficulty and self-destruction. So, I mean, there's so many more things I could talk about with this chart too, because the moon there in the 4th house, he was a naval. His father was in the Navy, so he was a military kind of brat. He went from military base to military base. So I don't really think he had like a very reliable set of, he wasn't in like one or two houses his whole childhood. I think he traveled around a lot more, which probably didn't lead to a lot of close friends or anything. But I know that I read that he spent a lot of time in libraries. And once or at some point in his high school years, his family was stationed near D.C., and he would go to some of the government libraries that were very, very big and very plentiful. And one of the things that was said about Jim was that he had this thing about holding his head to the side of it, like cocking his head to the side. And he would just like kind of, hang out. It was like a natural position. And the thing is that I heard is that he spent so much time in the libraries that his head was always cocked to the side because he was reading the bindings on the books, just strolling through. So his picture, a 17-year-old Morrison, maybe, reserved and, shy, just with his head cocked, wandering the rows of a library in D.C. Fascinating, digging up stuff about Dionysus and stuff. Yeah, so, and then we could also talk about how the moon is opposite Venus, but it's making a T-square, creating a T-square with the nodes, the north and south node. The moon is like red hot in a exact square position with the nodes, and Venus it's a wide orb of 10 degrees. But that's a very red hot aspect that could be discussed for a long time. We have Mercury here in the 12th house at 0 degrees. That's making a square, an applying square to Neptune, which is fantastic for creativity, but not good for an alcoholic, you know. So having this Mercury in the 12th house, not a good thing for an alcoholic. Having it squared Neptune, not a good thing. Another very fantastic for creativity, not so good for substance abuse. So Jim, just to kind of wrap it up and stuff, I've always kind of been a fan of the Doors. It's a fascinating chart too. I did a couple other example charts on different locations for his solar return. Maybe I'll talk about those more in a different video. Yeah, I always found Jim's chart to be fascinating to look at. He's got so many aspects that are like red hot, right on the money. And what's fascinating is that he had such a self-destructive fifth house, but the Jupiter is so well aspected and angular. He's such an example. Because I was saying earlier at the beginning of he's got a day chart, so it's a diurnal chart. The sun is above the horizon, which means the sun and Saturn and Jupiter are your major planets because they're diurnal. So he has the sun in the 11th, fantastic. Ruled by Sagittarius, fantastic. And Sagittarius and Jupiter, angular, fantastic. Now then also his ascendant is ruled by a diurnal planet, Saturn, in the 5th house, which can see the ascendant. All of these things just add tremendous ability to fulfill what the planets want to fulfill. So when stuff has this, when planets make angles and make connections with their rulership and or are angular, it allows them to fulfill their promise, as opposed to having the promise denied. And if a planet is in a poor position, in a poor sign that it doesn't rule and doesn't have aspects from rulers, because there's all different layers of rulers, that's when the planets can't express themselves, and that's when the area of life goes unfulfilled. So I hope I didn't ramble on too much. Catch you next time. Feel free to please leave a comment. Let me know how the audio sounds good, sounds bad. Do I ramble on too much? Constructive criticism welcomed. I'm Jim, Graybeard Astrology. See ya.